Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is another installment of Book Trek 2025. So, Book Trek is a yearly event where pretty much in the summer, June, July, and August, we read, we discuss, and we just kind of geek out over Star Trek fiction. It's been going on for a few years now, and one of the things I wanted to do for this Book Trek was to read some novels by Peter David. Peter David was a fairly prolific and much loved writer, not just of Star Trek fiction, but of course among that. And he unfortunately passed away a few months ago. So, in his memory, in his honor, I wanted to read some of his books. So one of the ones I had on my shelf was this one, Star Trek Next Generation Strike Zone. This is number 5 in the numbered Star Trek books. And it came out, I think, in the late 80s. Let's double check. Yeah, 1989. Really when season 2 was out, and a few episodes of season 2 had aired when he was writing this. So it's always interesting to read books from early on in seasons to see if they have really captured the voice correctly, because of course, writers change the way that characters might, what direction they might go in, how they might grow. And I will say that Peter David did a really good job of capturing these characters as they were in season 2. And he does it with a pretty quick moving, but very engaging novel. He's balancing many storylines or many different threads at once, and he does it very deftly, very expertly, and everything does kind of come to a satisfying conclusion. There are a few inconsistencies. Like we do in the beginning, Data does use some contractions, even though it's established by this point that he doesn't use contractions. There is at one point where he's talking. So I do wonder the writing process of this, where if maybe when he was writing, especially the first part of the novel, that was like very early on in like maybe Star Trek season 1, and then he finished it when more had been established. So, because by the second half of the novel, Data isn't using contractions, but he does in the beginning. So it just kind of makes me wonder. And there is also a weird inconsistency too. In season 2, I think it's when we're introduced to 10 Forward. So that's the lounge that the crew like to hang out at, that Guinan, played by Whoopi Goldberg, that she's the bartender of. And, I believe it's called that because it's on deck 10, the forward part of the ship. But at various points, it kind of goes back and forth between being called 10 Forward and 10 4. So it's very kind of weird. I'd never heard it called 10 4, so I wonder if that's just an error that kind of kept popping up in here that wasn't really corrected. But other than that, it's pretty smooth sailing for this. We essentially have a story about a alien civilization called the Creel, who do not get along with the Klingons, and they're kind of always at war, they're always fighting. But the Creel, who are basically scavengers and don't have very high technology, they come across a planet that has advanced alien technology that can basically wipe out ships, and is a threat not just to the Klingons, but also to the Federation. So there's a diplomatic mission going on the Enterprise that Picard has to try and handle, with Creel representatives and Klingon representatives on the ship. And that's the main focus of what's going on there and what's going on with this alien technology. And all the different characters kind of have their moments. They all are able to get involved. And we have even like subplots with like, Wesley possibly being influenced telepathically to obsess over finding a cure for one of his friends who's dying. So there's a lot of things that are kind of bouncing around. But like I said, Peter David does a really good job of not just keeping track of them, of incorporating them in a timely manner within the book, and really bringing it all together. There's nice moments of humor. Every so often, his humor gives me little eye rolls, but there were a couple laugh out loud moments in this. There's one in particular. This novel talks about how Riker gets his beard, and there's a pretty funny scene in an elevator with Riker and Picard, and Riker had a pretty funny line that made you laugh. So if you read it, or if you've read it, maybe you know what line that is. But yeah, the voices sound like the characters, and that's pretty impressive for an early novel in the series, especially one written, early 1989? I said. Pretty good that he was able to capture their voices. So yeah, I would actually recommend this. These things can be hit or miss. They're kind of made to be disposable in a lot of ways. Yeah, they're kind of like unaired episodes. But some of them are not very good, but this is actually one of the better ones, so I liked it. So yeah, if you've read Strike Zone by Peter David, love to hear thoughts. And as always, thank you, BookTube.